Hello and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show, the show that goes live every Monday at 1 Eastern Time on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and then is available on all of your podcast stations the next day. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And Hey Boomer is a show for those of us who believe we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. It is for lifelong learners who have found meaning and purpose or are looking for meaning and purpose and want to live our best lives. Do you ever run into those situations where you are so busy and you get to the end of the day and it's like, oh my gosh, I haven't done anything for dinner? Well, I want to recommend Real Eats, R-E-A-L, Eats, E-A-T-S. Real Eats is all organic food, locally sourced from farmers in upstate New York, chef prepared, all shipped in recyclable and compostable materials, and easy to prepare and delicious. I love these meals for when I have just run out of time or I haven't planned anything for dinner. If you use the link shrsl.com/3K97Y, then Hey Boomer will get a portion of the sale without any cost to you. And it's a great way for you to get a healthy meal and to support what we're doing here on Hey Boomer. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is withdrawing from life. Nobody wants to withdraw from life, right? But that's what retirement means. And so many people, when they get to that place in life or they're looking at that at the end of their career, they are stuck. They don't know what they're going to do. They're afraid of becoming bored and lazy and unhealthy and just missing that sense of purpose and meaning and usefulness in their lives. So I offer a 6-week group coaching program called What's Next. It's limited enrollment because I want to have ability to have conversations. And at the end, you're going to have a workable plan to help you feel good as you move into this next stage and give you insights into what you want to do. So this class, the cohort that starts tomorrow, is full, but there's a new class that's going to start on September the 20th. I encourage you to take a look at the heyboomer.biz/coaching site and learn more about it, or reach out to me and give me time with you, 20 minutes, to talk about where you're at, what this might do for you, and decide if it's a good fit. So that's the What's Next group coaching project. All right. Now to talk about this show. So did I tell you? This is the beginning of season 5. Yay! Very exciting. So the Dalai Lama is quoted as saying, as a Buddhist, I view death as a normal process, a reality that I accept will occur as long as I remain in this earthly existence. Knowing that I cannot escape it, I see no point in worrying about it. I tend to think of death as being like changing your clothes when they're old and worn out, rather than as some final end. Yet death is unpredictable. We do not know when or how it will take place. So it is only sensible to take precautions before it actually happens. That's the Dalai Lama. And it is only sensible. But many of us are uncomfortable talking about death. Have you had that conversation with your significant other, with your children or your parents, or friends or relatives if you're a solo ager? You know, there's the practical things like a DNR, living will, where do you want cremation or burial, all that kind of stuff. But then there's the other stuff, the deeper stuff, like how do you want to be remembered? What's your legacy? Are you afraid of dying? What do you want your final days to be like? Those are deeper conversations. And if you don't have them, you leave your loved ones guessing as to what you might want. My guest today, Michael Hebb, is the founder of deathoverdinner.org, which helps you host a facilitated dinner conversation with the important people in your life about death. Michael is now broadening his dinner conversations to include generations over dinner and drugs over dinner. But we're going to start out talking about death over dinner after I introduce you to Michael. Hey, Michael.
Hello.
Welcome to Hey Boomer.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm going to do a real brief introduction about you. So as I said, Michael is the founder of Death Over Dinner, and he started studying architecture at Portland State University. And then in 1999, Michael and Naomi Pomeroy co-founded Family Supper in Portland, which was a supper club that's credited with starting pop-up restaurant movement. And they started a couple of restaurants during that time, which garnered international acclaim, I understand. Then Michael has a book out that was published in 2018 called Let's Talk About Death. And it is also available internationally in many languages. He served as a teaching fellow at the Graduate School of Communication at the University of Washington. And he's a writer, and his writings have appeared in USA Today, GQ, Food and Wine, as well as numerous other publications. And he's a regular speaker at conferences and universities. What did I leave out, Michael?
No, that's funny.
A million things. All right. So, obvious question. You studied architecture, but now you're doing these dinner conversations. Tell me about death over dinner. I listened to your TED Talk. So tell me about death over dinner and how you got started in that.
Sure. And I actually studied classics and architecture. And so the combination in many ways led to, without me knowing it when I was studying it, but led to the creation of Death Over Dinner and a lot of the work that I've done around the table. And there's it takes a little bit to explain the connection between death and a table and the exchange of ideas, because we've stopped viewing the table as a place where we come together to share ideas. We really don't know how to eat together anymore. And there's been a lot of emphasis focused on how the food gets to our table, the farm-to-table movement, organic food and real food, real eats, as you mentioned, et cetera. A great deal of emphasis there, as we needed to emphasize that because we pretty much destroyed our food system in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. But I noticed that we weren't giving people instructions or inspiration for what happens when we actually sit down. And that's where the classics come in. Mm-hmm. The ancient Greeks were great at gathering around a table and sharing ideas and knowing how to really to make most advantage of that time. And those conversations over dinner, which were called symposiums when they were official,
okay,
were, and you might find Plato or Socrates or Aristophanes or Aeschylus or any of these principal players in the creation of Western civilization at a dinner table talking about the nature of love or death or a relationship to the gods. And these conversations are where we actually develop the ideas for democracy and our justice system. So there's a lot of power in gathering and talking over the table. There's many examples throughout time. And we won't go into that because this isn't about the table.
Well, it's also about building relationship. I mean, the exchange of ideas is tremendous, but building relationships is something that seem to need a little help these days as well.
Yeah, we're deeply isolated, and we also aren't given a lot of tools for deep interpersonal connection. We go to our therapist, we go on retreats, we do a lot of things that are not within our actual friend group, that don't strengthen the bonds within our family or our friend group. It's very rare that you have an activity that does that. And, been gathering leaders around the dinner table to talk about the most critical issues we face for the last 20 years, and presidents and Nobel Prize winners and remarkable folks, all the way down, or not down, but all the way to people that are struggling to find a place to live, those that are unhoused and unsheltered. And what I realized was that the most difficult conversations, the ones that we avoid, are actually the ones that have the most potential for human connection, and
Mm.
for deep bonds, and to give us an opportunity to transform our perspective and live differently. And that's really where the idea for Death Over Dinner came. I was gathering all of these incredible leaders at tables one by one, and I realized I wanted something that was democratized and available to everyone and could spark a global conversation, if not just a national conversation. And so we built this project at the University of Washington called Death Over Dinner, with the idea that if we talked about our mortality, a lot of things, and we can go through the different um, benefits that you get, because that's something that's been underemphasized in our culture. But if we talk about our mortality, a lot of great things happen in our life. And no one's doing an advertising campaign for that. There's PSA on facing your death. So, but we launched it, and there's been over 1 million people who sat down and broke bread and had this conversation.
So you've had over 1 million conversations. Wow. So the story, I mean, there's so many topics, right, that you could have talked about, but you started with death. So what gave you the insight that death was the conversation to start with?
Well, it's something that we all share, and it's something that many of us avoid, and we consider it taboo. So it fulfilled this, the need for it to be a difficult conversation, because I was looking for one that was challenging. We're not getting together to have dinner and talk about the weather. We're talking about something that we don't talk about every day. And with the Jewish Seder, they say this night is not like other nights.
That's right.
And the dinners that I create are not like other nights. They're not your average Tuesday. They require a little preparation. And death, for me, was deeply personal. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when I was in second grade.
Oh.
And he died when I was 13. And that his illness and his death had a huge impact on our family. And really, and many people will resonate with this. It was the type of illness and death that actually fractured our whole family structure and our whole family tree, nuclear and extended. And still, we're, trying to heal that. But a lot of blame and shame and miscommunication and misunderstanding. And I saw the kind of the worst of it when a family doesn't have the tools, and doesn't take the time to talk about, terminal illness, eventual death, how to honor somebody, what to do with their stuff. And it really came back to me as an echo later in life when I was thinking about what's the one topic that could do the most good for people and for society. And the reality is our healthcare system is bankrupt because of the fact that we don't talk about death. We spend something like 70% of healthcare expense in the last 2 years of life. It's the number one cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States, is end of life expense for a loved one. So it's bankrupting us, it's bankrupting the system, and it's avoidable. We can have a conversation about how we want to be taken care of in our final days. And that, yeah, go ahead, Wendy. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, how personal it was for you. And, I think you're right. We can all relate to experiences like that, and how difficult it is to talk about. So you talked about some of the benefits.
Many more.
Right. But what I was going to say is, so as we think about doing this and inviting people over, they're going to be like, what? You want to talk about death over dinner? So how do you approach people? How do you explain to them why this is important to you and to them?
Yeah, so everyone's a little different on this topic. And so that's the thing. And so I think of it a little bit like courtship. Um,
Courtship.
yeah, when you're courting somebody, and especially if this is somebody who's very important to you, um, as it relates to this conversation, your spouse, your parents, your kid, your best friend, your health proxy. These are people who you really want to have the conversation with. It's great to have it with an extended group of friends or even strangers because you're practicing and you're getting better at it and you're learning what you want. But you really want that information to live with the people that are going to make decisions for you, and take care of you and honor you. And so, with those people, there's not just one way to invite them into this conversation. You really have to think about, what is mom like? What is dad like? What does he relate to? Bill Russell just died. Was he prepared for end of life? Maybe your dad or maybe your mom is a big Celtics fan. Maybe they're a big Aretha Franklin fan, your spouse, etc. She was terribly unprepared and it created total chaos for her family, after she died. Same thing with Prince. Maybe you're a John McCain fan. He was a grade A student. Maybe you don't like John McCain. It's fine. But talk about a person who had the conversations with his family, told him exactly what he wanted, was very clear on what happens to his stuff, knew how he wanted to be honored and memorialized. And that is a gift to your family.
Mm-hmm. That is a gift to your family.
Yeah, because they actually will grieve less deeply and for a shorter duration if they have instructions from you about how to honor you. Simple
Mm-hmm.
stuff. What song to play
Right.
at the funeral? What happens to your body? This is a tremendous gift. So there's a lot of, again, we're into the benefit, but you really want to think about how to communicate to that person. Do you send them an article? Do you just tell them that, hey, this death over dinner thing, there have been a million people that have done it and there's no negative reviews? Quite literally.
Yeah.
We've never gotten negative feedback from a dinner. And this is the Yelp,
Wow.
universe where everyone loves, to say something negative. And the reality is the experiences are actually quite gentle and very human, the conversation. So, try invite people, but don't say we should have this dinner or we must have this dinner. Say, I think it would mean a lot to me because I think about these things and I love you and I want to make sure that I'm able to take care of you or have you take care of me. Um, so, like that.
Now, as you know, I started to go through the process of trying to sign up for this,
Mhm.
and it asks you a lot of questions about, who are you thinking about inviting, and what kind of dinner do you want as far as the conversation? Is it about you, or someone else? I was kind of surprised at the end there was no charge. And so I want you to talk about that. But also, it seemed that there was going to be like some pre work to send to the people
Mhm.
you invite. So, can you talk about what happens? What's the flow like and at dinner?
Yeah. So, yeah, deathoverdinner.org is the website. And it is a simple process. It asks you two questions. Who would you like to invite to dinner? And that can be multiple choice. And you also don't even have to answer that one. The second question is what your intention is. And that is a critical question because it's a very different type of dinner when somebody has just received a terminal diagnosis, than somebody who's dealing with grief, or family that's dealing with grief, or a young family, or younger people that just want to talk about end of life for spiritual reasons, or because they want to plan, or that makes them less anxious to know that they, have a relationship, like the Dalai Lama says, to the fact that they're going to die. So your intention is very, very important because it allows us to generate a script for you. And that's what everyone gets, is a script for your dinner. And the script is very clear. There's no guesswork. You don't need a facilitator. You just need to follow a couple of the guidelines and the questions that everyone that is comfortable answering will answer at the table. And that's pretty much it. You do light a candle for a loved one who's died, and essentially give a 1-minute eulogy. And there's a couple other little things in there, but that's the script. That's the process. It's very simple. There is no charge. We don't do anything with people's email. We just send you the PDF. And we also do send you the homework that you've selected. As we noted, this is not your average dinner conversation. And we know that people may not be some people think about death all the time. And, there's death doulas everywhere these days.
Death doulas.
And there's a huge growth in the end-of-life industry and people that are interested in this space. But that doesn't mean that everybody is. And so we want to give people something inspiring to read, watch, and listen to that will prepare them for the dinner and open up their mind so they're not, just coming to it without any consideration. And so that's the homework portion. And then it is free because I think it's essential that people have these conversations, and we wanted to make sure it was for everybody. I had a aha moment when I was in my mid-20s and I read Stuart Brand's work, the author of the Whole Earth Catalog and many other things, really significant futurist. And he wrote, "Civilization is my client," and he didn't necessarily mean it in that grandiose way. It just means that that's who he's working for. And that really resonated with me. And I said, well, yeah, that's who I'm working for. It's not for a corporation, or it's not for even a nonprofit. I want to do stuff for people. And I don't want to charge them. So we decided to make leftover dinner free. And all of the projects that I do tend to be free for the users.
Which is a gift. You've been using that word a few times today, so that is a gift that you bring. We talked about maybe doing a question or two that we might have on the show. So do you want to ask me? Do you want me to ask you? How do you want to do that?
Well, why don't I ask you one?
Okay.
And then you can ask me one. So I'll ask you a simple one, because it might not be simple for you.
I'll ask you the same one back, by the way.
Oh, you will? Okay, great.
Because that's the way it would work at a table, right? Everybody
Sure.
answers the same.
In that case, let's go a little bit. We'll go a little bit deeper.
Okay.
So Wendy, let's say you have an hour left to live, and you have the ability to make one or multiple phone calls. Who are you going to call, and what are you going to say?
Great question. And that's a great question to remind myself of every once in a while. Am I doing what I want to be doing if I only had an hour left to live? I do ask myself that every once in a while. So I think I would definitely want to call my kids. And I probably want them on the phone at the same time, so I'd probably use something like FaceTime or WhatsApp or something. And I just want to tell them how grateful I am. I'm going to cry. How grateful I am that I got to be their mom. I got to be in their life and watch them grow. And it would be really hard to say I'm leaving in an hour, because there's so much more I want to see of what's going on with them and their kids. But I believe that spiritually, in the ether somehow, we still are connected. And so I will still be there and know what's going on, and they can feel me when they listen. And so that's what I would do if I had an hour left to live. What about you, Michael, if you had an hour left to live?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would certainly call my daughters, without question, and let them know it's going to be okay. I've raised them to be citizens of the world, like to be really self-sufficient and to have a deep understanding of who they are and why they're here, even at age 21 and 13. And I just remind them of that and let them know I'm gonna be around. They can call me in whenever they need me,
There you go.
and that because that was the relationship I've had to my father. He's been very present um, after he died, and in my life in some really powerful ways. And then I would spend the rest of the hour calling all my friends to deputize them, to remind them that what their responsibilities are when it comes to my daughters.
Aw.
And of course, we spend the last minutes of the hour on the phone with my partner, Ari.
Nice.
Yeah, and we asked this question as that kind of smelling salt reminder that we all do have a last hour, um, and we want to practice thinking about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
we want
Right.
we want to think about who is what is absolutely the most important thing to us, which will come up in this question. And are we giving it the oxygen and the love and the light and the water and the everything that it needs, as much as we possibly can? Um, so,
So the explanation that you just gave after you answered the question, is that going to be part of the script? Why those questions are important? No.
well,
Just
we don't provide, commentary on it. I mean, my book is a great bit of commentary on why we want to face our death, or is what the ancients have always said is dying before dying. And this has been part of every wisdom tradition,
dying before dying.
especially the Tibetan Buddhists, but the ancient Greeks, early Christians, for sure. I mean, really, the forefathers of the Christian church. And I think Paul had written at his monastery, "To die before we die is to know God," or something like that. I can't remember the quote, but the Stoics, the literally every wisdom tradition we could possibly go through, there is this notion of practicing dying, of being in front of something that's larger than ourselves and surrendering to it and learning from that, which is such an important tool, especially in the crazy world we live in.
So important. So important. And Maria said she'd prefer to write something down than call on the phone because her kids text instead of call.
Yeah.
And I think the way I'm understanding this, there is no right or wrong answer. You do what you feel is the right answer for you.
Yeah, and the thing is, these questions and this topic has always been and is really powerful medicine. Um, Not just for making sure that you're prepared and you have your checklist and you're feeling less anxiety and you've communicated all those things, but the reality is having these conversations and doing this work just even with yourself. If you just went and looked at the questions in my book or on Death Over Dinner, if you downloaded a dinner and use them as writing prompts,
Yeah.
what you're doing is giving yourself more vitality. It has always been the case that turning to face our mortality is the thing that gives us the most clarity, vitality, sense of purpose, and that's. I think Confucius said it best when he said, "In each life there are two lives, and the second one begins when you realize you only have one."
Yeah.
So,
So you started this whole movement of dinner conversations, I think, with Death Over Dinner. Is that right?
yeah, I mean, it was as a as a broadcast movement that others can take part in. I was doing topic-based dinners, or have been doing topic-based dinners for the last 20, almost 25 years, in in every continent except for Antarctica. Um, and so that Death Over Dinner was the first of its kind to say, let's take this topic and make it a global conversation. And then we've done various other iterations.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. I'm seeing a comment here that Heidi says that she doesn't want to. So living your best life at this moment is what it's about, not dinner. She doesn't want to do a dinner. So I'm curious as to why, but I'll have to talk to her later. But
dinner's just one tool. So the thing about dinner is it's enticing. People like to have dinner parties. People like to come together around food. It's a kind of magnet. It's connected to our DNA. It's actually cooking food is how we made the leap from ape to human. We don't have to get into the science of it, but that is literally the DNA of how we became human. It was from concentrating calories via cooking. It is a place where there's a lot of civility, just by the nature of it. People know that there's certain rules about eating together. You listen to folks. You don't tend to talk over them unless your family has that, tick about you. On this topic, people don't talk over each other. They listen, and then they talk. It's one of those things that does just force it. But dinner's not the only way. Your listener, take these questions or any other set of questions around end of life and go for a walk with the person you want to talk to. Go for a drive. That can be even more effective if dependent upon the person. So I'm not a dinner or bust person. I just know it's a very useful tool.
Yeah. So now you broadened it, right? And we mentioned in the beginning, drugs over dinner and generations over dinner. And then I think you said there was one other that was coming. Oh, the climate over dinner.
Yeah, we're working on a climate change project.
So talk to me. So generations over dinner is coming in September, right? You're launching that in September?
Yeah, in September. And I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with a superstar in the boomer and aging space, Chip Conley, who's the founder of the Modern Elder Academy. So Chip and I have been collaborating on a new project called Generations Over Dinner. And we built it in partnership with Stanford Longevity and Encore.org and Esalen, the famous retreat center, as well as a long list of partners are joining us from all over the world. And the idea is very simple. We wanted to model the type of world that we want to live in. And there's a lot of ageism in this world. There's a lot of ageism in the workplace. There's a lot of ageism across our society. And instead of saying, how do we elevate elders once again, or how do we solve, the division between the generations, or their stereotyping of each other. So, well, let's actually just create this experience that elevates all the generations, because we won't ever have elders again unless we create an environment for multiple generations to share wisdom. That's where we get elders, because the fact is, when there's many generations at a table or at a gathering and they're sharing, there is something more heightened about an elder's experience in most cases, because you've been around longer and you've seen more. But we don't create opportunities for that kind of place within our culture. And so it's disappeared. We don't really even have an understanding of the word elder anymore. It sounds like either the elderly or some sort of notion from a traditional indigenous past or something, when it's just the idea of communicating what you've learned. so that
Well, and one of the things that Chip wrote about in his book that was so great was that the learning from both sides, like he came in as the elder at Airbnb, but then he learned so much from the younger people there as well. And we tend to self-isolate, you hang out with people who are like you.
yeah,
And by expanding that so that you start to understand and break down the barriers and stop with the stereotyping, I think that's powerful.
yeah. And so it's a very, very simple idea, with a challenge attached to it.
Oh, okay.
The generations challenge, which is how many generations can you gather at a dinner table?
Hmm.
So it's and people like a challenge, but there are right now 7 living generations, and we're talking about not your family generations, which is fine too. You can consider it that way, but we're really focused on silent, greatest, boomer, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and then Alpha is the youngest. So for the first time in history, there are actually 7, demarcated generations that are alive in numbers, at the same time. And so, the Mount Everest of this challenge is, can you get 7 generations at the table? And it launches in September, and it'll just be generationsoverdinner.com. And it's not live yet, but they'll start to hear about it. I'm sure the media will give us some love, and people in their community will probably start talking about it. But it'll be pretty exciting to watch. And you'll pick a topic it's not about death.
Right.
Not about death. There's 3 topics that we're starting with. Love and relationships is one. Purpose is another, which will be near and dear to you. And then the future. So, and that gives us an opportunity to talk about social justice and climate change and the impact of technology on our lives.
And do you get a script for that as well and pre-work? And yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that one it's kind of the 2.0 of this model. So there's a whole community, that is being established. So anybody who hosts a dinner or invites people to a dinner, they have the ability to be part of a digital community.
Oh, I want to do that.
Yeah.
But 7, I mean, I'm thinking that's a baby in a high chair. That's a distraction for a dinner.
No, it's the alpha generation is about to turn 10.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And so, like I said, this is the Everest. Not everyone's going to do 7 generations. And so, like, I just did a dinner, our first pilot dinner last week, and we had 5 generations. We had a 19-year-old and an 80-year-old. And it was extraordinary to watch, even the connection and appreciation that happened between those 2 strangers on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And,
It was on Zoom.
yeah, and we only had an hour together,
Mm-hmm.
and we all walked away with extraordinary respect for the 19-year-old, and a real appreciation for where the 80-year-old was coming from at it all. So it works, and
Sure.
expands our generational literacy, because it's one of those things where we don't even know that we live in, often don't see ageism when it's happening. Um,
So is the website live? I've got it up here now, generationsoverdinner.com.
it's not
not
live.
live
It'll
yet.
be live in a few weeks. So.
Okay. So y'all look for that. I'm going to have to introduce you to Thelma Reese. Thelma just said that she's doing work at Temple University on intergenerational, where they have people that are, Thelma's in her 80s, high 80s, and, from probably 70s and 80s that are working with students at Temple University in an intergenerational program. Fascinating.
Great.
Yep. And then she said also you should know about Anna Hall's work. Do you know Anna Hall?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm going to take a note.
I'm going to have to connect you with Thelma. I'll do an email connection for you guys. So, do you find that talking about death and talking about generational differences is more of a Western problem that we don't do that well, or is it just global?
Well, we have westernized so many things, including the Western medical way of dying, including the fact that generations are less and less likely to live in the same, house together. That's still more intact in a lot of cultures where, your grandmother is not put into a nursing home, but as part of the family unit as long as as a, as they can be. Um, so it's not that it is as much of an issue globally, but it also is an issue globally. We're seeing the shift from being a massively intergenerational planet to being a much more siloed planet. And
Mm-hmm.
so for those places that still have generational, intactness, then what a great opportunity to, you know, oil up that machine and keep it running. And, we don't want to be trying to save an animal as soon as it's on the endangered or the extinction list. You want to start a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as far as death and dying goes, people like to say, well, we're terrible at it in this country, but they're great at it in Mexico or Japan or India, where they have a completely different relationship to death and dying. And the reality is, in those countries, India, well, we're going to be vastly generalizing here, but India, Mexico, and Japan, very, very good at grief, very good at what would be called continuing bonds in the grief world, to continue to have a relationship with the person that has passed, whether it's in Japan having an altar in your house, or in India being oftentimes much more of a visceral experience being at the cremation, or Mexico, the Day of the Dead. That's on the grief side. There's two halves to this equation, and when it comes to terminal diagnosis and dying and actively dying, no one does it well.
Mm.
And so, and it's never going to be fantastic, right? It's a terrible thing, and I'm not Pollyanna about it. I'm not trying to say, I don't even like the word the good death movement, for instance. I don't believe in a good death. I believe that we can have better deaths,
Mm-hmm.
and we can be more alive and can be more part of living while we're dying, as opposed to it being
Right.
part of some other thing. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So yeah, we all need to get better at facing our mortality. And the reality is everything has changed when it comes to how we die, because we do often know, I think 8 out of 10 of us will get the diagnosis for what will actually eventually kill us.
Mm.
Um, and that's never happened before.
Right. Right. Michael, what a great conversation. I appreciate that you're gifting this to the world, all of these things that you're doing. And I'm looking forward to being part of them. But I'm always ask my guests for 2 or 3 takeaways
Sure.
from the things we talked about. So what would you like to leave us with today?
Yeah, don't be discouraged when your loved ones give you resistance to a conversation about death, or really any difficult conversation, but especially about death. Don't be discouraged, and think of it as a courtship. Be resourceful. And then the other takeaway will attach to generations over dinner. Could you invite 5, 4, 3, 7 generations to a table? Like, do a quick inventory. How generationally diverse are you in your life? And I think that's an important thing just to consider, to start with, like, oh, wow, I actually could only invite 2 or 3. So those are the 2 takeaways. go easy on yourself and the people around you when it comes to hard conversations. Be creative. And how generationally diverse is your life?
Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff. Good stuff to think about. Thank you. If people want to reach out to you, they can find you on your website at Hebb, HEBB.life, LIFE. And you can learn more about Michael and contact him through that. I encourage you all to schedule a Death Over Dinner and watch for the Generations Over Dinner. Connect with me about the What's Next coaching. If you are struggling with what's next and you want to know, you can always just drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. I want to tell you about our next guest. This month is a little bit about stretching your comfort zones. So today was the first taste of that. Next week, we're going to be meeting somebody named Stella Fossey. And Stella is writing about erotica for women over 50, and that we are still sexy in our 60s and even into our 70s. So if this idea pushes your comfort zone, you come, because it really is pushing on gendered ageism too, right? Like only young people should have the experience of erotic lives. It can continue on. So Stella Fossey will be my guest next week. And I like to remind you all to live with passion, live with relevance, and live with courage. And remember that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. Thank you so much, Michael.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, and whoever's listening in on the podcast.
Yeah. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.